So this video goes through the multiple choice questions for Econ 1, the first section of the course, the basic economic problem. So what will happen is you will see the question and you will then be given the options to give your answer. You'll get your quick bit of feedback on whether you've got the answer right or not, and then you can watch the next little section, which is me explaining the answer. So if you got the answer right, there's no need to watch the explanation. If you didn't get the answer right, then watch my explanation and come and ask me if you have any problems and don't understand why I have explained the answer in the way that I have. So the correct answer in this case is D. Limited resources have alternative uses. So way to think about this is as soon as you see in the title or in the nature of the question the word choice, okay, you need to be on the lookout for anything in the answer which talks about alternative uses or opportunity cost or something like that. You need to understand that the idea of choice is choosing between different options, choosing alternatives. So the correct answer in this case is D. So typical question, this one, in that there are a few that are kind of red herring answers here. The main thing that you need to look out for in the question here is the use of the word central. So although A and B are could be argued are kind of incentives and objectives within economics, they're not the central purpose of economic activity. The central purpose of economic activity is C, to use the resources that we have in the best way to generate the greatest satisfaction of needs and wants. More straightforward one here. The key here to identify was that an economic resource means a factor of production. Okay, so when we were looking at the factors of production, we said that they were the raw materials essentially that go into economic activity. They are economic resources. The only one of these answers which is therefore considered to be an economic resource is enterprise D, one of the four factors of production. So hopefully you remembered from the first one the importance of the word choice in the question. And again, although there are kind of some ones here that are there to throw you a bit of a red herring, the correct answer here, as soon as you've got choice, remember we are looking for the idea of alternatives or opportunity cost, the idea that when you make a choice, you have to give something up. I hope that nobody went for A and C, because they are basically the wrong way round. Wants are infinite and resources are finite in most cases. So those two are incorrect. So I hope we didn't go for those. The final one there, again, just thinking about the course, could have answered that one. When we were dealing with the basic economic problem, we hadn't done externalities, so there's no way you would have been able to do that one. So by elimination, you should have got to B being the correct answer in this case. So a longer one here. In actual fact, you didn't really need to even read the little introductory sentence there. You could have probably figured this out from it otherwise. This, again, we're talking about the nature of resources, specifically the difference between an economic resource, which is one where there is scarcity, and a free resource, which is where there is no scarcity. A few of the things that we could kind of do immediately, we could rule out that one on the basis of the fact that it talks about there basically being a choice, so there obviously is an opportunity cost. We can also rule out that one, that it talks about externalities and therefore the social costs are higher than the economic costs. We know that none of the factors of production are considered free, so it can't possibly be that one. So the natural environment in this case must be an economic resource. A is the correct answer. And so another question on the difference between economic goods and free goods. Again, some ones that we can rule out immediately. It's not that one, that's a free good. So we're now down to the remaining three. An economic good doesn't have to be supplied competitively necessarily, nor does it have to make a profit. You can have monopolies where there is no competition and loss-making economic goods, so it can't be either of those. So an economic good is one where there is scarcity involved, and as soon as there is scarcity, we have a choice and therefore opportunity cost. So the correct answer in this case is A. This is probably one of the easiest multiple choice questions that we've seen. Factor of production questions, so all you were looking for here was a factor of production. The only mention of a factor of production here is land, and therefore the correct answer is B. The only thing to be a little bit careful of here is that they do mention labour down here, but the productivity of labour is not the factor of production. The labour itself is the factor of production. So the only one of the things listed here which is in itself a factor of production is land. So again, key thing here to pick out was this fundamental economic problem. The word fundamental, as we saw earlier on, I think the word was central earlier on, but there are frequently these words here where they are directing you to think about the core principle of economics. And the core principle of economics are the choices between the goods and services which are being made. And therefore, although B, C and D would all be considered economic problems, they are not the fundamental economic problem. So the fundamental economic problem is all about resource scarcity and how best to use our scarce resources in order to meet the needs and wants in society. And to do that, we're thinking about what the goods and services that we produce are, how we produce them in the most efficient way, and for whom we produce them. One, again, that would need a little bit of thought here before you rush straight in. First of all, which ones can we eliminate? We can eliminate B and C. Generally supplied by the government because its consumption is considered to be socially desirable. That's a merit good, not a free good. It has no externalities associated with its consumption or production. That doesn't make it a free good. There are many goods that don't necessarily have externalities associated with them. That doesn't make them free. If it's perfectly inelastic supply, then that means there is only a fixed and single amount of that good which can be which is available, so it's not that one, and that leaves us then with A. So A, no opportunity cost in supply. We know that because if the good is free, then that implies that there is no scarcity of that resource. If there is no scarcity, then we don't have to make a choice with scarce resources. And if we don't have to make a choice with scarce resources, then there is no opportunity cost. So the correct answer in this case was A. Right, this one, not a nasty one, but definitely one that you needed to give a little bit of thought to. So let's kind of go through and have a look at them. Features of the fundamental economic problem. We know that the fundamental economic problem is all about scarce resources. So unlimited resources, what we see in A here, makes A not correct. We know that the fundamental economic problem is all about scarcity, so it can't be that one. If we are dealing with scarcity, then that means we're having to make choices with scarce resources. So we must be incurring an opportunity cost. It can't be C. So now we're down to B and D. B and D does talk about scarce resources, which we know is part of the fundamental economic problem. But when we read a little bit further, we see limited wants. And as we saw in one of the questions earlier on, wants are unlimited. That's the problem that we have, the fact that resources are scarce and that wants are unlimited. So it's D, that's ruled out there, which means that, again, by elimination, we are left with B. The reason this was slightly tricky was because actually it doesn't talk about the key identifiers of the fundamental economic problem, which is kind of the scarcity of resources, and the opportunity costs involved. They hid those in the other sentences. But the ones here that you need to focus on, trade-offs is basically another way of saying an opportunity cost. If you make a decision to do one thing rather than another, that is a trade-off. And conflicting objectives is another problem another part of the fundamental economic problem where basically people compete with one another in order to get those scarce resources. So that one was not immediately obvious, and a very good example of some multiple choice questions where, although the exam board is not setting out to trick you, you do have to be very, very careful and make sure you read absolutely the words which are written. I would imagine a good many of you selected D there because you started reading the scarce resources and limited things and wants, and you assumed that that was the right answer. You have to be really, really careful when you are making these decisions. The correct answer in this case was B. And the relatively simple factor of production question to finish with, which of the following would be classified by an economist under the factor of production known as land? Again, by elimination, you should have been able to get this, although the answer is perhaps not what you would immediately expect. Definitely not a tractor. A tractor is quite obviously capital. Definitely not a farmer. A farmer is quite obviously labour, which leaves us with B and D. Chemical fertiliser. We are not there talking about something which is extracted in its natural state, hence chemical fertiliser rather than natural. So chemical fertiliser implies that it's had some sort of production process which has been done to it. That makes it man-made, and if it's man-made, it's capital. So we can rule those out. So the only one of those that would be considered land is fish in the ocean. The reason being that they are, when they are caught, they are kind of basically as nature created them. So remember that we define land as being the physical space and anything natural contained within the physical space. So fish in the ocean would also count. Minerals in the ground would also be considered land when they're in their unprocessed state and so on. So again, just kind of remembering the slightly wider classification of land, which is why the question alludes to an economist thinking about fish as land. Because obviously most other people wouldn't. So just a quick recap then on the key aspects that you need to have mastered for the basic economic problem to deal with the multiple choice questions. So the first thing is that the fundamental economic problem, or the basic economic problem, is scarce resources, sometimes called economic goods, and the combination of those things with unlimited wants. The fact that we have those two things together, scarce resources and unlimited wants, means that we have to make choices, and that those choices generate an opportunity cost. Understanding the relationship between those key terms is the single best way to score good marks on the basic problem multiple choice. Next major thing to master is the difference between economic goods, which is goods where there is scarcity, and free goods where there is no scarcity. Third key thing is to understand the factors of production, what each of them are, but also, as we saw with the last question there, to kind of think about the slightly wider context. So anything man-made is going to be considered capital, and anything natural is generally going to be considered land. Remember to include those wider definitions in your thought process. And the final one really is just a general word of advice for dealing with multiple choice questions. When I was going through these and pulling out all of the individual multiple choice questions, in this section alone, there were 5 questions that were word for word exactly the same as questions which have appeared on a previous paper. So it is really important just to practice these, because there is a reasonable chance that you will see a question which was included in this video. So knowing the answers to these can get you basically some free marks. So they are very repetitive. Certainly within the basic economic problem, there are really quite a limited amount of questions that they can ask. So learn the ones that have been included here, learn the 3 key points that you can see listed above, and there's no reason why you shouldn't score full marks on this section.